Imagine this. You spend 6 hours, right, 6 whole hours on this dusty desert porch. And you're not like kicking back or relaxing. No, you're literally rolling around on the floorboards, trying to feel some kind of difference between one tiny spot and another.
Sounds completely bizarre, doesn't it?
Totally. And all this is happening under the really cryptic, kind of unnerving guidance of this enigmatic old man. You'd think it was some kind of strange dream, maybe, or just a really peculiar experiment.
But it wasn't a dream for Carlos Castaneda. He was this, anthropology student, very conventional ideas of a research.
Right. And for him, this wasn't a dream. It was actually the very first incredibly uncomfortable step into a world of learning that was just, well, worlds apart from any academic syllabus he'd ever encountered. Welcome to the deep dive.
Today, we're really plunging into just a fascinating text. It kind of blurs the lines between anthropology, mystical tradition, and spiritual apprenticeship.
We're talking about Carlos Castaneda's Teachings of Don Juan, a Yaqui Way of Knowledge. And just to be clear, our deep dive today is based entirely on the insights and the experiences that are chronicled right inside this foundational work.
Yep. We're going to explore this extraordinary journey of Carlos, the student, as he meets Don Juan, who's described as a Yaqui man of knowledge.
And we want to uncover how Don Juan's teachings, which seem so arcane, so out there at first glance, actually offer these incredible universal lessons that honestly resonate really powerfully even today in our modern lives.
And what truly stands out for me, about this material is how Don Juan takes what seems like abstract knowledge, maybe even purely mystical stuff, and he grounds it. He grounds it in these profoundly concrete, sometimes really startling, and always experiential practices.
Exactly. So our focus today isn't just going to be on what happened to Castaneda, the narrative itself.
No, it's more about why it matters, why it matters for you listening right now. How can these sort of ancient concepts be applied to your own quest for understanding, for navigating challenges, for cultivating personal growth?
Right. And you'll find some really remarkable insights here. Things about recognizing your own, let's call them energetic power spots, confronting your fears head on, understanding different kinds of power, because not all power is the same, and continually kind of invigorating your own pursuit of knowledge.
Absolutely. So think of this deep dive as maybe your practical guide. We're trying to extract these profound insights from a really unique source text.
We're definitely going beyond just retelling this story. We want to distill the core lessons about developing, a heightened awareness, about facing those internal battles we all fight, and about discerning which paths in life truly lead to a more purposeful existence.
Our mission, really, is to make these sometimes abstract concepts feel relatable, feel actionable. We want to spark those aha moments, the kind you can actually carry into your daily life.
Yeah, it really is all about the implementation, isn't it? The potential for personal transformation that comes from genuinely engaging with these ideas, not just reading about them.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's the summer of 1960. Carlos Castaneda, he's a graduate student, UCLA, I think.
That's right.
And he's doing his research trips, through the American Southwest. His academic mission seems pretty straightforward. He wants to gather information on medicinal plants, especially peyote, from the indigenous communities there. Standard anthropology stuff.
Yep, field work. So he's in this border town, waiting for a bus, chatting with a friend who's been helping him out with his studies.
And then his friend leans in, almost like sharing a secret, right? And points to this white-haired old Indian sitting calmly over by the window.
And the friend says, that man, he's very learned about plants, especially peyote.
Sounds perfect, doesn't it? Like the ideal academic lead, the exact source you'd want for an anthropology paper. But what's really intriguing, right from that very first moment, is how quickly Carlos's initial goal, that purely academic pursuit, just gets completely sidetracked, almost immediately.
Yeah, he's focused on facts, on observation, collecting data, keeping that proper scholarly distance.
But when he asks for an introduction to this man, Don Juan, their first encounter just shatters that scientific detachment right away. Don Juan's quiet way of being, and Castaneda specifically mentions his remarkable eyes. They don't just look at Carlos.
No, it's like they see through him. It's disarming in a way he's clearly not ready for.
Absolutely. And Castaneda writes it himself. He says, I was annoyed at having talked nonsense to him and at being seen through by those remarkable eyes.
So it's not just an interview anymore. It's this profound, deeply uncomfortable feeling of being observed, like really seen, maybe for the first time, in a way that just goes way beyond the usual surface interaction.
And it forces this immediate, almost gut-level reevaluation of why he's even there, what his purpose is.
And that's exactly it, because Carlos, through his academic lens, he initially just sees Don Juan as, quote, a rather peculiar man who knew a great deal about peyote and who spoke Spanish remarkably well. He's putting him in a box.
Categorizing him, yeah. Fitting him into his neat little academic framework.
But the local community around Don Juan, they have a completely different, much more potent understanding of him. They believe Don Juan has some sort of secret knowledge that he was a brujo.
And we really need to understand the weight of that word brujo in this context. It's not just a simple medicine man or curer.
No, it carries this really powerful implication of a person who has extraordinary and usually evil powers. That's the local understanding.
So right from the jump, Carlos's carefully planned scientific investigation gets abruptly shoved into these channels that are just, as he says, worlds apart from his original intention.
And this early dynamic, it just perfectly illustrates that fundamental difference, doesn't it? Between trying to study something objectively from a safe distance.
Yeah. And actually stepping into the messy, deeply personal, often really challenging world of experiential learning.
Yeah, true. Transformative learning, the kind Don Juan represents, it often kicks off precisely when we're forced to ditch our preconceived ideas and step way outside our intellectual comfort zones.
So this first meeting, it's marked by this real discomfort, this fundamental questioning of his whole academic project. And it sets Carlos down a path that's just miles away from where he thought he was going.
And for us, thinking about implementation, the practical takeaway here is pretty profound, isn't it?
I think so. True learning, real growth, it very often starts when we allow ourselves to step outside those neat boxes, our preconceived notions, and actually embrace what feels initially uncomfortable or illogical, or maybe even just plain weird.
It's about being open to insights that fundamentally challenge how we see things right now, even if they feel chaotic or unsettling at first.
That willingness, that leaning into the unknown, that's really the first step toward genuine discovery, isn't it?
Definitely. And that embracing of the uncomfortable, it deepens quite a bit about a year into their growing friendship, I suppose.
Yeah, because Don Juan finally takes Carlos fully into his confidence. He reveals that he possesses this secret knowledge, this whole profound body of wisdom that was passed down to him from his own teacher, his benefactor.
And then comes the moment that just reshapes Carlos's entire life. Don Juan tells him he's been chosen as his apprentice.
But the warning comes right alongside it, and it's absolutely clear. This training, this path, it's going to be long and arduous. It requires nothing less than a very deep commitment.
Yeah, this isn't like signing up for a night class where you can just drop out if it gets a bit tough. Don Juan makes it clear this demands everything from the apprentice.
And a really fascinating, maybe even a little unsettling part of this commitment is the introduction of this whole Diablero concept.
Right. Don Juan reveals that his own benefactor, his teacher, was a Diablero.
Which, according to the Sonoran Indians referenced in the text, means an evil person who practices black sorcery and is capable of transforming himself into an animal, a bird, a dog, a coyote, or any other creature.
That immediately sets a really serious, almost kind of sinister tone, doesn't it? It imbues this lineage with a sense of danger, of potent, maybe even dark power.
It does. But what's really crucial to notice is that the source material itself immediately gives us conflicting viewpoints on this idea. It adds these layers of nuance and complexity right away.
Yeah, like when Carlos mentions seeing this huge coyote that his Indian friend suggests might actually be a Diablero.
The reactions are all over the place.
Yeah.
They range from total skepticism to, fervent belief. It really reflects how differently people respond to things they can't easily explain.
Exactly. For instance, there's this young guy, Choi, who just dismisses the whole Diablero idea as pure bull. He says flat out, people imagine things.
Yeah, he tells this story about seeing a huge animal on the road that turned out to just be a woman. He rationalizes it all away.
But then, in total contrast, you have Dona Luz, this middle-aged woman, who says with real conviction, only God knows that for sure, but I think it was not a coyote.
And she tells this really chilling, very specific story about a woman who used to turn into a female dog and was actually killed while in that form. And her relatives demanded payment from the white man who killed her because, Dona Luz insists, the white man knew it wasn't just a dog.
Wow. And then there's Gennaro, an old man who adds another layer. He confirms that, yes, at one time there were Diableros, but the people were very afraid of them and had them all killed.
He even recalls the last one he knew, someone called S, who was apparently burned alive back in 1942. And he describes how there were no ashes left. Just a huge pool of grease. It's this stark, almost mythical kind of account.
So, stepping back from the specific folklore, these really varied perspectives on diableros and secret knowledge, they're incredibly instructive, aren't they? Far beyond just the story itself.
Absolutely. They show us how different people interpret the exact same phenomena. Some dismiss it through a purely rational lens, like Choi. Others accept it as fact based on tradition or belief. And some, like Donna Luz, offer these anecdotes that, for them, completely reinforce the belief.
And that offers a really profound lesson for us, I think, in how we categorize truth in our own lives.
Yeah. Our understanding of what's true is often fundamentally shaped by our cultural background, our personal belief systems, or maybe even our direct, even if unexplainable, experiences. It's often not just about objective, verifiable data.
It really challenges us to think about the limits of our own ways of knowing and to maybe acknowledge that different realities, different ways of interpreting the world can actually coexist.
So from this really profound commitment and this introduction to this world of the unseen, a world that's clearly filled with both wonder and potential danger, Don Juan starts to introduce specific practices.
And he begins with this foundational exercise, something that seems, on the surface, incredibly simple, almost mundane even. But it carries these really deep implications for our daily energy, our focus, and our overall well-being.
Okay, let's really unpack this next pivotal phase, because Don Juan gives Carlos this assignment that just sounds utterly baffling. Ridiculous even. Find a spot, he says, where I could be at my very best, just there on the porch.
And the key instruction is he has to find it by feeling the spot. Not by looking, not by logic, but by feeling.
Right, and Carlos, being the, quintessential anthropologist, he naturally approaches this with his typical method. Rational, systematic, and ultimately completely futile.
Which immediately brings up a fascinating question for us, doesn't it? How often do we, in our own lives, approach problems or challenges armed only with logic, systematically analyzing things, laying out pros and cons?
While maybe totally ignoring our intuition, our gut feelings, or even just subtle signals our body might be sending us. Exactly. Carlos's first attempts are a perfect example. He paces around for over an hour, then he tries lying on his back, then his stomach, meticulously covering the entire floor area for 6 hours until 2 a.m.
And inside, he's just exasperated. He's thinking, I felt I was wasting my time. He notes maybe a slight warmth on his back at one point, but no real discernible difference between any of the spots.
He even tries sitting where Don Juan usually sits, assuming logically that must be the spot. But nope. Feels exactly the same to him.
And Don Juan, with this kind of subtle wisdom, he deliberately doesn't give him explicit instructions at first. He holds back.
Precisely to force Carlos to engage his senses differently, to move beyond just thinking about it and into direct, embodied, intuitive experience. He's trying to train him to perceive beyond just the obvious rational layer.
So after this completely exhausting night, Carlos finally gives up. He tells Don Juan he had been rolling on his floor like an idiot all night and still couldn't make any sense of his riddle.
And Don Juan, instead of getting annoyed, he just laughs. But then he offers this crucial piece of guidance. Carlos wasn't using his eyes correctly.
He says profoundly that one can feel with the eyes when the eyes are not looking right into things.
That's a huge turning point, isn't it? It introduces Carlos and us, really, to this idea of non-ordinary perception, the blurring of sensory boundaries.
And when Carlos finally tries this technique, keeping his eyes fixed on a point in front, but allowing his peripheral vision to sort of soften and gather information, the darkness around him literally starts to change.
He begins to perceive these subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in color. He describes a homogeneous greenish yellow in one area that then turns intensely purple in another. And later, uniform chartreuse shifts to a sharp verdigris.
It's a completely new way of seeing, not just looking.
And here's where it gets really deep. These colors aren't just visual phenomena for him. Carlos describes that they feel different. They seem to carry some kind of energetic charge.
He talks about grappling with this strange cleavage between my pragmatic experience and my rational deliberations, as he desperately tries to make sense of these startling new perceptions within his logical mind.
He meticulously marks the spots where the colors change. But when Don Juan pushes him again, asking how he feels on them, Carlos still reports nothing, just gets a persistent headache and this weird metallic taste in his mouth.
His frustration is palpable. He says he wanted to quit the entire apprenticeship right then and there.
But Don Juan, he's just this unwavering guide. He tells him he has to be inflexible with myself if I wanted to learn. He gives him really two choices, either to quit, go home, or to solve the riddle.
That deliberate frustration, it's clearly part of the teaching method, isn't it? pushing Carlos past his mental blocks, his reliance on logic alone.
Absolutely. And he does push through. What this whole exercise offers us, thinking about application, is this powerful metaphor for training our awareness, learning to pick up on those subtle environmental cues that do impact us, even if we don't consciously register them most of the time.
Right. We might not literally see greenish yellow turn purple, but we've all had that experience, haven't we? Walking into a room and feeling an inexplicable sense of uplift, or maybe an immediate draining of energy.
That's exactly what Don Juan is asking Carlos to tune into, that subtle, intuitive feeling.
And then Don Juan gives these spots specific names, which really imbues them with this profound significance for, as he says, a man's well-being.
The good spot, the one where Carlos eventually just passes out from sheer exhaustion and a kind of energetic release. That's called the sitio, his spot.
And the bad one, the one Carlos later feels this inexplicable fear towards, a real sense of dread just approaching it. That's called the enemy.
And these aren't just random labels. They represent these powerful energetic points in the environment.
And this isn't just some vague, abstract concept about vibes either. Don Juan is very explicit. He explains that sitting on your sitio gives you superior strength. It makes you feel vibrant, capable.
While the enemy spot actively weakens you, drains your vitality. He even says it could even cause his death if you linger there too long.
And the subtle colors he perceived are linked to this too. They affect your strength. Don Juan points out that Carlos actually replenished his energy just by napping on his sitio earlier that morning. It's tangible proof of its effect.
So these spots aren't just physical locations, they're potent energetic anchors. The sitio refills your tank, the enemy drains it.
Which explains Don Juan's persistence, why he refused to just point it out to Carlos. It's the very first fundamental practical lesson in managing your own personal energy and understanding these profound, often unseen environmental influences that affect us constantly.
So for implementation in your own life, you could start asking yourself, how can you identify your own sitio, your own energetic sweet spots in your daily environment?
It might be a specific chair where you always feel focused and creative, right? Or maybe a particular room in your house that just feels calming.
Or a place in nature that always invigorates you. It could even be a mental state you cultivate that consistently fosters deep concentration and renewed energy.
And conversely, you can start recognizing your enemy places or situations. That could be a perpetually cluttered desk, maybe a specific meeting room where you always feel stressed.
Or even just a toxic social media feed, or certain conversations that always leave you feeling drained.
And once you identify them, the lesson is clear. Find ways to minimize their impact. Or, ideally, just avoid them altogether if you can.
The profound insight here is really about consciously choosing environments and interactions that actively support your well-being and your energetic vitality instead of just letting them happen to you.
Absolutely. And this foundational lesson, learning to recognize your energetic spots and learning to perceive beyond the purely obvious, it really sets the stage for Carlos. It prepares him for deeper, far more challenging encounters, particularly with these profound spiritual beings like Mescalito. Okay, so after going through that crucible of the sitio lesson, Don Juan decides that Carlos has finally developed enough backbone, he calls it, enough inner strength, basically.
Right, enough fortitude to meet Mescalito.
And this isn't just about, ingesting a substance. It's presented as this meticulously choreographed, highly ritualized encounter. It's steeped in profound respect and ancient tradition.
Don Juan orchestrates this ritual ingestion of 7 peyote buttons, which he refers to as Mescalito, personifying the plant. And he gives Carlos these very specific, almost seemingly arbitrary instructions.
Like, don't swallow the buttons whole. Use tequila to rinse his mouth at certain times. Eat dried fruit and meat at precise moments.
But here's the really crucial detail. Don Juan insists that someone else, a trusted friend, has to be the one to provide the Mescalito. Because, as he says with this almost sacred reverence, he either takes you or throws you away.
It frames it as an initiation, doesn't it? Not some casual experiment you can just try out.
Absolutely. And that emphasis on ritual and the idea that Mescalito chooses you, it really highlights a profound respect, maybe even awe, surrounding these experiences in Don Juan's tradition. It underscores that this is far, far from being recreational. It's a sacred initiation into a deeper reality.
And Carlos describes the immediate physical effects as pretty intense. A pungent bitterness that quickly numbs his mouth and throat.
Followed by this bizarre sensation of vomiting without physical contractions. which, surprisingly, he describes as a pleasant flow of liquid words. Strange.
Very strange. And then he experiences this weird linguistic confusion. He hears men speaking Italian about sharks, which somehow, in his mind, gets linked to a mispronounced river name from earlier that day.
This initial phase, it just vividly shows the mind's extraordinary ability to interpret, reconstruct, maybe even conjure reality under these altered states of consciousness. And the subtle, often unexpected ways our physical and mental states are just intricately interconnected, especially under that kind of profound influence.
And these initial physical and mental effects, as disorienting as they sound, they're really just the prelude, aren't they? The opening act for the profoundly transformative visionary experiences that Mescalito offers.
Yeah, Carlos starts experiencing these dramatic shifts in perception. He describes an almost impossible pinpoint vision, seeing water as shiny, viscous.
And then seeing a common dog suddenly become transparent, filled with iridescent fluid. That sounds terrifying.
It's terrifying, yes. And then a journey through a tunnel made of solid tinfoil. Later, he encounters a giant bee that speaks to him, and eventually a monumental glowing face of Don Juan himself appears.
And ultimately, Mescalito appears to Carlos directly as an anthropomorphic figure described as a man like us or as a light, a direct, powerful presence.
And Don Juan later confirms that Carlos is a chosen man, specifically because Mescalito played with him. That interaction signifies acceptance, signifies potential.
The really profound aspect here is how Don Juan consistently frames these intense, often scary experiences. He doesn't dismiss them as hallucinations. He presents them as direct lessons, as profound teachings.
Exactly. Mescalito isn't just a psychoactive plant in this context. He is a protector and a teacher, someone who advises and answers whatever questions you ask.
So Carlos's ability to play with Mescalito, to interact rather than just being overwhelmed or rejected, that indicates this deep acceptance from the ally. It signifies Carlos's inherent potential as an apprentice.
And this concept of being chosen, it isn't really about being special in some conventional, ego-driven sense. It's more about being uniquely receptive, capable of navigating this particular, often very arduous path of learning.
It definitely challenges our comfortable assumptions that learning is always this pleasant, straightforward intellectual exercise.
Absolutely. In fact, Castaneda has shown this deeply unsettling vision of his own aging, feeble future, held quite literally in Mescalito's hand. It's a stark reminder of mortality, but that, too, is framed as part of the teaching, a necessary truth.
So for us, this raises a crucial question, doesn't it? How do we interpret our own challenging or unsettling experiences in life?
Right. When something difficult or profoundly uncomfortable happens, can we start to see it maybe as a lesson, as a potential teacher, even if it doesn't feel pleasant or clear in the moment?
Can we recognize signs of our own chosen path, maybe not as an easy ride to success, but as an invitation to a deeper, more challenging, and ultimately more transformative kind of growth? It really invites us to reframe adversity as instruction.
So what does all of this truly boil down to? The most profound, the most foundational lesson from Mescalito. It actually transcends the individual visions. It directly challenges Carlos's fundamental perception of reality. And it offers this powerful, maybe somewhat stark truth about living in the world.
Yeah, Carlos, still trying to make sense of it all, he asks Mescalito directly, am I doing the right thing? Am I on the right path? What should I do with my life? Basic, fundamental questions.
And Don Juan later explains Mescalito's response. He says Mescalito initially showed Carlos the world of happiness where there is no difference between things, this state of blissful, undifferentiated unity, pure peace.
But then, abruptly, Mescalito shook you out of it and showed you how a man thinks and fights. That is the world of man. And to be a man is to be condemned to that world. Wow.
That is a truly pivotal philosophical point, a core teaching from Don Juan. Carlos, still caught up in his ingrained academic, dualistic way of thinking, believes he lives in two worlds, the ordinary and the non-ordinary, the mundane and the spiritual.
But Don Juan, with absolute conviction, emphasizes that for a man, for a human being, there is and can only be one world. The world of human experience, struggle, decision, and the inherent, contentiousness of life.
He tells Carlos almost bluntly, you have the vanity to believe you live in two worlds, but that is only your vanity. There is the one single world for us. We are men and must follow the world of men contentedly.
And Don Juan clarifies that Mescalito's initial terror, that shocking whiplash from bliss to harsh reality, it wasn't meant to scare Carlos away. It was meant to reveal this singular, inescapable truth with unbelievable clarity. It's a powerful grounding message against just trying to escape reality.
The practical application of this lesson is just immense, I think. It's a profound call for you, the listener, to fully engage with the human condition, to accept its inherent challenges, its struggles, its joys, and to find contentment and purpose within it, not somewhere else.
It's about maybe letting go of that often tempting search for an easier path or some other path, whether that's through constant distraction, digital escapism, or just avoiding difficult realities.
Instead, it encourages full, conscious, unreserved participation in your present reality, here and now. It's about embracing the path you have with heart and with unwavering intent.
So while Mescalito teaches us to embrace our singular reality, to confront the nature of existence head-on, Don Juan also introduces other allies. Allies that offer different kinds of power, but often, with far greater risks and much more unpredictable consequences.
Right. So first, let's turn our attention to the volatile and often perilous nature of what he calls the devil's weed.
Okay, so after the relatively, gentle guidance of Mescalito, even with its terrifying moments, we turn to another really formidable ally in Don Juan's world, the devil's weed, also known as datura.
And Don Juan clearly has a very strong, maybe even prejudiced, view of this plant. He categorizes it using this vivid personification, and he calls it woman-like.
Which, in his explanation, means it's possessive, inherently violent, utterly unpredictable, and has, quote, deleterious effects on a person's character. It messes you up.
He starkly calls it a giver of superfluous power, and he expresses this strong personal dislike for it, stating flat out there is no use for it anymore for someone on the path of knowledge.
It's fascinating that personification, especially since yerba, the word for weed in Spanish, is grammatically feminine anyway. But he's clearly emphasizing specific traits he associates with it.
Absolutely. It immediately highlights the plant's perceived inherent characteristics and dangers within Don Juan's specific tradition. And that phrase, superfluous power, that's really key, isn't it?
Yeah, it implies power that's unnecessary, maybe even detrimental, because it ultimately distracts you from the true path of knowledge, according to Don Juan.
His value judgment here is incredibly significant. He fully acknowledges its immense potency, its capacity for extraordinary feats, but he chooses not to pursue it for himself anymore.
He even recounts, killing a man with a single blow and effortlessly tossing huge boulders around in his youth when he was under its influence, feats of just immense physical strength.
But now, looking back, he states with this profound sense of hindsight, it was all for nothing.
Which serves as this really powerful cautionary tale, doesn't it? About the pursuit of raw power, especially external power, when it lacks wisdom or purpose or some kind of clear, ethical framework.
It really compels us to ask ourselves, what kind of power do we seek in our own lives? Is it power just for its own sake, for control over others? Or does it genuinely serve our well-being and our growth?
Could it, in fact, make us, as Don Juan warns, weak in the middle of our great power? That's a chilling thought.
And what's truly striking is that even though Don Juan has these clear reservations about the devil's weed, his actual teachings about how to use it are incredibly ritualized. They require meticulous preparation and very specific actions.
That intensely controlled approach, it just underscores the immense discipline and respect that are needed when you're dealing with such potent, potentially dangerous forces.
The plant itself is described as having 4 heads, each corresponding to a different part and function. The root is for power itself. The stem and leaves are for curing maladies, seen as a gift. The flowers can turn people crazy, obedient, or kill.
And finally, the seeds. They're considered the most powerful part, the sober head that supposedly fortifies the heart.
And he describes these specific, really elaborate rituals just for gathering the plant, distinguishing between male plants, thick bush, forked root, and female plants, taller single root, cutting them with a special palo verde stick at particular times.
Then mashing, soaking, heating them in precise ways. He even emphasizes that the plant must catch the night air, el sereno, like it has to absorb the mystical properties of the darkness.
This extreme ritualistic exactness, it really underscores a universal principle, I think. Certain energies, certain endeavors, they demand absolute precision, foresight, and profound respect.
The meticulous detail, distinguishing male and female plants, their different parts, the laborious preparation, it just highlights the immense discipline and the accumulated knowledge required to even approach such a force safely.
And the idea of the seeds being the sober head, that suggests a theoretical path to control within this powerful alliance, although Don Juan himself admits it's rarely, if ever, fully achieved. He says, To tame the devil's weed into an ally is one of the most difficult tasks. Even his own formidable benefactor apparently never fully managed it.
So it raises a crucial question for us, doesn't it? What areas of our own lives, especially those involving powerful forces or complex challenges, could really benefit from a more meticulous cleaning and preparation, as Don Juan might put it?
Are we precise enough in our intentions, in our actions, in our respect for the forces we engage with when we're pursuing something significant, maybe potentially overwhelming?
And the first practical application of the devil's weed that Carlos experiences is this testing of affinity. It's a crucial step, using a very diluted extract from the root.
Right. It's designed to produce a clear physiological response, either a sense of well-being, which indicates you have an affinity with the plant's power, or discomfort, which signals you don't.
And in this highly diluted form, Don Juan explains, it can be used for, quote, all the matters of manhood. For old people who have lost their vigor, for young men who are seeking adventures, or even for women who want passion. It basically provides this raw physical surge of energy.
Thinking about implementation, this initial test can be a really powerful metaphor for that initial rush, right? The fleeting benefits we might get from quick fixes or easy paths or maybe superficial sources of energy or confidence.
Yeah, they might feel powerful and immediately appealing.
But they can often lead to dependence or unforeseen complications or maybe undesirable side effects in the long run.
And Carlos himself experiences significant, almost overwhelming discomfort after drinking this root concoction. Intense heat, profuse sweating, debilitating stomach cramps, red spots appearing on his skin, chattering teeth, profound nervousness.
Don Juan even observes that Carlos came out in her defense when talking about the plant afterwards, sounding like a lover, which indicates this powerful, almost addictive draw it has.
Yeah, he describes how it makes muscles feel like they're swelling with vigor, fists are itching with this desire to strike someone, and the soles of the feet are burning to run somebody down. It's intense.
So this initial test is critical for determining if the apprentice is taken by the plant. But from Don Juan's deeper perspective, that superfluous power it grants, while maybe superficially appealing, is ultimately seen as a distraction, maybe even a detriment to the true path of knowledge.
And the devil's weed isn't just about personal vigor. Its potency apparently extends to much stranger, more specific actions, like divination, through this truly bizarre and, frankly, gruesome ritual involving lizards.
Yeah, the second portion of the devil's weed is specifically for divination and what Don Juan calls bodily flight. The divination involves the sorcery of the lizards,
which is this painstaking process. Catching them, talking to them, then sewing their mouths and eyelids shut with agave fibers.
Rubbing them with a paste made from the seeds and other ingredients, including, crucially, Carlos's own blood.
Wow. And after all that, their direction upon release is observed. Northeast is considered good, but incredibly difficult to achieve.
The striking thing here is just how detailed, how gruesome, and how seemingly nonsensical these steps are. It profoundly underscores this idea that power, especially a power as volatile as the devil's weed, often demands these unusual, deeply uncomfortable, and profoundly symbolic acts.
Carlos describes the sensation of holding this stiff lizard with its sewed-up mouth and then experiencing a disembodied voice whispering thoughts into his ear that were not his own. That sounds truly unsettling, an externalized intuition almost.
Bodily flight, on the other hand, is achieved by rubbing oneself with a different paste, this one containing specific male and female root parts and wild boar fat.
And Don Juan insists it's not literal bird-like flight in the ordinary sense. It's a non-ordinary reality experience of soaring through space with extraordinary speed. He states with absolute certainty a man who has taken the devil's weed flies as such.
So for implementation, the lizard sorcery, for all its strangeness, it could represent a powerful metaphor, couldn't it? For accessing and maybe externalizing your intuition, or seeking answers from incredibly unexpected, unconventional sources, being open to insights that defy normal logic.
And bodily flight could be a metaphor for transcending your perceived physical limitations through a profound shift in consciousness, or maybe gaining a radically new, elevated perspective on your environment, your situation.
It compels us to ask, are there unconventional sources of insight or inspiration that we typically ignore in our daily lives just because they seem too strange or illogical?
How do we break free from our mental ruts or our perceived physical limitations to gain genuinely fresh perspectives? Don Juan, through these really extreme experiences, is pushing Carlos to literally get out of his own head, to see things differently, to perceive what he otherwise couldn't.
And unlike the unpredictable, and at times really perilous, devil's weed, Don Juan introduces another crucial ally. He calls this one the little smoke. And this ally offers a vastly different kind of power, one focused purely on refined seeing, on precise knowing, and on profound inner clarity.
Okay, so Don Juan introduces the little smoke. This comes from psilocybe mexicana mushrooms, the hallucinogenic kind, and he presents it as an ally specifically for those who want to watch and see.
And he describes it with immense admiration. He calls it peerless, unmatched.
And crucially, unlike that capricious and volatile devil's weed, the little smoke is said to bring clarity. It reinforces the heart with inner strength, and it's constant predictable.
He even categorizes it with masculine attributes, male-like, dispassionate, gentle, predictable, and ultimately beneficial. It's a stark contrast to the devil's weed's personality.
A key takeaway here seems to be that this ally offers a fundamentally different path, a less violent, more stable way towards knowledge and insight.
Yeah, its properties emphasize meticulous observation, inner fortitude, and a calm, clear mind, rather than, external manipulation or raw physical power.
And the preparation process itself is a testament to its nature, isn't it? It's described as this meticulous, year-long endeavor just to make the smoking mixture.
Involving specific mushrooms, various leaves, flowers, all dried in particular ways. Some in the shade, others in darkness, some even sealed in pots to mold in damp earth. It's incredibly precise.
Don Juan points out that the mushrooms themselves are the real secret. They require a long and dangerous trip just to gather them, and incredibly careful selection. He warns that serious harm will result from using the wrong kind.
And he also crucially emphasizes that the user must intend and will his return. Or he says the smoke will not let him come back, which highlights the importance of clear intention and self-mastery right from the start.
Thinking about implementation, this really highlights a powerful universal principle, doesn't it? Profound insights, true breakthroughs, lasting wisdom. They often require immense patience, painstaking preparation, and above all, a clear, unwavering intention for what you seek to gain and what knowledge you intend to bring back from the experience.
It's a powerful counterpoint to the whole idea of quick fixes or instant enlightenment. It's about a deep, committed engagement with the process and having a precise purpose guiding your actions.
Don Juan further stresses this unique process of becoming intimately familiar with the pipe itself, the instrument used to consume the little smoke.
Yeah, this isn't just about learning how to smoke it properly. It's presented as this critical, almost sacred step that symbolizes forging a deep, respectful bond with this powerful ally.
He gives Carlos the pipe just to hold, gradually, requiring absolute and careful concentration. He warns that any fumbling with the pipe would inevitably result in his or my death.
Which vividly symbolizes the profound respect and precision required when you're forming a deep connection with any powerful tool or body of knowledge or transformative process you might acquire in life. It's not trivial.
And then comes the astonishing, almost unbelievable experience, becoming something entirely new.
The smoking experience itself, as Carlos describes it, causes this intense numbness, a profound loss of body awareness, and a sensation he calls a cold heat.
And with Don Juan's guidance, Carlos begins the process of transforming into a crow. Not literally, of course, but by thinking himself up, by consciously winking his eyes open.
Feeling legs grow from his chin, a tail from his neck, wings from his cheekbones, and finally a beak forming. It's a complete sensory transformation.
And this crow form allows for free movement, this almost effortless soaring, and crucially, a profound new way of seeing.
Yeah, this transformation, it's clearly not a literal physical metamorphosis. It's a deeply vivid, immersive, non-ordinary reality experience, a fundamental shift in perception, and a powerful means of gaining entirely new insights.
The crow's sight apparently allows for seeing the inner movement, the life force within things. It enables the perception of what's truly alive versus what's dying, and even predicting violent outbursts or hidden intentions.
Carlos describes his whole body was numb, mentholated, feeling as if his body was disappearing and only my head was going to remain. Then sensing bird's legs, which were weak and wobbly at first, and then a strong beak growing, a new visceral awareness of his transformed form.
He learns to shift from one eye to the other as a crow, allowing for this expanded field of vision.
And Don Juan explains that a crow can easily see when something is dead or about to die, but more broadly, it helps see what to avoid and what to seek, which sounds like a profound metaphor for heightened intuition and discernment.
So for implementation, this extraordinary shift in perspective, it can be a really powerful metaphor for achieving radical empathy or understanding in our own lives, can't it?
Absolutely. How can you learn to see the world or a complex situation or even another person's perspective from a completely different viewpoint?
It's about developing your intuition, learning to read those subtle cues, understanding the underlying dynamics, the hidden energies in interactions or situations.
And the idea of not bothering or attracting attention as a crow, but rather moving with stealth and dispassion, that suggests the importance of adaptability, observation, and maybe strategic quietude in achieving your goals without creating unnecessary friction.
And this is where it gets truly extraordinary, even within this context. This ability to see and perceive hidden truths, it isn't just presented as a neat trick or an isolated experience.
No, it's intricately linked to understanding one's own destiny, a destiny revealed through the most unexpected messengers.
Don Juan tells Carlos that the silvery birds he saw during his flight weren't just any crows, they were emissaries of your fate.
Their flight patterns, the specific time of day they appear, their direction across the sky,
Yeah.
all of it is presented as omens, foretelling his future, including eventually his own death and his transformation into a crow himself. It's this profound personal prophecy.
It vividly demonstrates how these non-ordinary experiences become deeply, irrevocably integrated into one's understanding of self and destiny in this tradition.
The crow form, for Carlos, is presented as permanent. It links him irrevocably to this specific path of knowledge and its unfolding journey.
And Don Juan's strict instruction to never, absolutely never copy or ask about the songs that belong to another man emphasizes the profound individuality, the unique nature of each person's journey on this path. It's not one size fits all.
He even tells Carlos that when his silvery white crows finally come for him, signaling his ultimate transition, his death, there's no need to shout at them, just fly with them as you have already done. It's this deep acceptance of destiny.
Thinking about implementation, this concept serves as a powerful reminder, doesn't it, that our lives are often filled with signs, patterns, omens, if only we're trained or perhaps just open to seeing them.
It encourages a heightened sense of awareness and discernment in your daily life, prompting you to recognize subtle patterns and signals that might guide your decisions, reveal your true path, or simply offer profound insights into the flow of your own life.
It's about becoming more attuned to the subtle whispers of your own destiny, maybe, rather than just stumbling through life disconnected from its deeper currents.
And this whole profound journey with these various allies, whether it's the unpredictable and perilous devil's weed or the peerless, clarifying little smoke, it all serves a much larger, overarching purpose in Don Juan's teachings.
Right. It's all part of the relentless, often brutal pursuit of becoming a man of knowledge. And that path is fraught with challenges, epitomized by what Don Juan calls the 4 natural enemies.
Okay, let's really unpack this core teaching, because it feels profoundly universal. It offers this incredible framework for understanding personal growth and the inevitable challenges we all face on any path of learning or mastery, not just Don Juan's specific one. Absolutely. Don Juan states unequivocally that the path to becoming a man of knowledge is an unceasing process. It's a lifelong journey, marked by 4 symbolic, formidable, natural enemies.
These are fear, clarity, power, and old age.
And he emphasizes these aren't obstacles you defeat once and then you're done. No, they're internal adversaries that you have to battle repeatedly, continually throughout your life in order to maintain control over yourself and your journey.
What's truly insightful here is how each enemy represents a distinct psychological, maybe even spiritual obstacle. And overcoming one doesn't lead to peace. It leads directly to the emergence of the next, often more subtle, challenge.
As Don Juan vividly puts it, learning is never what one expects. Every step of learning is a new task, and the fear the man is experiencing begins to mount mercilessly.
This model powerfully suggests that progress in life, in learning, it isn't linear, it's cyclical, it's filled with new tests.
And perhaps most counterintuitively, even apparent successes, like gaining clarity or attaining power, can themselves become dangerous traps if they're not handled with profound wisdom and humility.
Exactly. Let's dive deeper into each of these enemies, because for all their mystical origins in Don Juan's world, they offer incredibly practical, relatable lessons for anyone striving for personal growth, anyone on a path of self-improvement.
Okay. The first, and maybe the most immediate, enemy is fear.
Don Juan describes fear as treacherous and difficult to overcome. He says it lurks insidiously at every turn of the learning path.
And if a person, confronted by this fear, runs away, abandons their quest, then the entire journey, the whole pursuit of knowledge, it just ends right there. Game over.
The crucial insight Don Juan offers is that conquering fear doesn't happen instantly, like flipping a switch. It happens little by little through consistent small acts of defiance against the fear.
And yet, he says, the fear is vanquished suddenly and fast in that moment of breakthrough. It's gradual effort leading to a sudden shift.
And this conquest, it doesn't just remove the fear. It actively replaces it with a newfound clarity of mind.
This is immensely practical for you listening now. For implementation, this means actively identifying the specific areas in your own life where fear holds you back, where it paralyzes your progress.
Maybe it's the fear of failure preventing you from starting that new project, or the fear of judgment stopping you from sharing your unique ideas, or simply the fear of the unknown keeping you stuck in your comfort zone.
The profound lesson here is to take action despite the fear, to proceed with what Don Juan calls an unbending intent.
Understand that this process of confronting fear is gradual. It's built step by step, but it culminates in that breakthrough moment, like sudden realization of your own capability that replaces the paralysis with clarity and forward momentum.
It's not about being fearless. It's about moving through fear with deliberate purpose.
But here's where it gets really interesting and maybe quite counterintuitive for many of us. Once fear is vanquished, a new enemy immediately arises, and it's one that's often mistakenly celebrated as the ultimate goal: clarity.
Don Juan explains that clarity, even though it's hard-won and feels empowering at first, can paradoxically blind a person.
How so? It creates this false assurance he can do anything he pleases. It makes him never to doubt himself.
And this, Don Juan warns, is a mistake.
Yeah.
It's an incomplete state that inevitably leads to fumbling, to missteps, and ultimately to stagnation.
A person defeated by clarity, consumed by their own perceived understanding, will no longer learn or yearn for anything. They stop growing.
He might become, as Don Juan starkly puts it, a buoyant warrior, someone who fights without true purpose or wisdom, or maybe even just a clown, someone puffed up with incomplete knowledge.
So to truly overcome this subtle enemy, Don Juan says, one must defy his clarity, constantly question it. Use it only to see, and then wait patiently and measure carefully before acting. Don't jump to conclusions based on that clarity.
This is such a powerful and relevant lesson for our modern world, isn't it? With information overload everywhere.
Definitely. True understanding, Don Juan teaches us, it isn't about absolute certainty. It's not about feeling you know it all.
Instead, it's about a state of profound knowing that still remains fundamentally open. Open to new information, open to doubt, open to continuous learning.
Overconfidence, born from that superficial clarity, it can be just as dangerous, maybe even more so, than paralyzing fear, because it halts all further growth.
So for your own life, think about recognizing those moments of overconfidence or rigid certainty. Cultivate humility even when you've achieved a level of mastery in something.
Continuously question your own assumptions. Stay curious. Never stop being a student even when you feel like an expert. That constant self-interrogation seems to be the key to true ongoing growth.
Okay, so if clarity can be this deceptive trap, then the next enemy is perhaps even more seductive and potentially more destructive: power.
Don Juan describes power as the strongest of all enemies, the most intoxicating, the most difficult to resist.
It tempts a person to give in completely because they feel utterly invincible, like nothing can touch them.
And yielding to this temptation, according to Don Juan, leads to becoming a cruel, capricious man, someone who wields influence without empathy or wisdom, even while they still retain their clarity and the power itself.
A person defeated by power, he says, dies without really knowing how to become a man of knowledge. Their journey is incomplete, their potential ultimately unfulfilled, wasted in a sense.
To truly defeat this enemy, Don Juan insists one must defy it deliberately. You have to consciously push back against its pull.
And come to the profound realization that power is never his. It's not something you own, it's merely a force flowing through you.
And therefore, you must constantly maintain control over himself, rather than seeking control over others. The focus shifts inward.
Don Juan himself recounts, as we mentioned, how he killed a man with a single blow and tossed huge boulders in his youth under the influence of power.
But now reflects with profound wisdom that it was all for nothing because it lacked true purpose.
So for implementation, this really compels you to examine how you wield influence or authority or any form of power in your own life, whether it's in your job, within your family, in your community.
Do you use it with wisdom, with humility, for a greater good? Or does it subtly lead to arrogance, to an unchecked ego or desire for control over others?
The lesson here is about constant self-monitoring. aligning your actions with an ethical purpose. Understanding that true mastery is over oneself, over one's ego, and impulses, not merely the acquisition of external influence.
Power, Don Juan reminds us, is a tool. Responsibility, it should never become your identity.
And finally, after battling these formidable and subtle foes, fear, clarity, and power, a man of knowledge faces the ultimate, unavoidable enemy, old age.
This enemy, Don Juan acknowledges, is the cruelest of all. Precisely because it's the one that won't be able to defeat completely but only fight away. You can't stop it, you can only manage your relationship with it.
It brings with it an unyielding desire to rest, a profound natural tiredness that can just sap your drive, your will to keep going.
And if someone yields to this natural inclination, Don Juan warns, they become a feeble old creature. Their spirit dims, their purpose is lost.
The victory against this final enemy, Don Juan explains, isn't a final triumph. It's not about conquering death. It's a brief moment, which really implies a continuous, sustained effort of maintaining one's clarity, power, and knowledge, even in the face of inevitable physical decline.
So for implementation, this inspires a really powerful mindset of lifelong learning, doesn't it? Lifelong engagement, vital presence, actively resisting complacency as you age.
It's about finding an enduring inner strength and purpose to continue growing, contributing, engaging with the world, even when the body naturally slows down or experiences limitations.
It acknowledges the physical realities of aging, but profoundly emphasizes the enduring importance of mental, spiritual, and intellectual vitality. It's about living with that unbending intent right up to the very end of your journey.
The journey through these four enemies is just incredibly intense, isn't it? Arduous, deeply personal.
And it becomes abundantly clear throughout the text that the teacher-apprentice relationship is absolutely paramount. It provides the consistent guidance, the validation needed to navigate such a challenging path. And it creates this unique, deeply shared understanding, what Castaneda calls a special consensus on perceived reality. Central to Don Juan's entire teaching process, really, is the absolutely indispensable role of the teacher. Don Juan consistently provides what Castaneda calls special consensus on his experiences in non-ordinary reality.
Which makes sense because these experiences are profoundly subjective. Castaneda himself notes their lack of ordinary consensus, meaning, they can't be objectively verified by others in a conventional way.
So the teacher's role becomes absolutely critical in validating the experiences, interpreting them, and ultimately giving them meaning within the system.
And this process involves meticulous recollection of events and description of perceived component elements after each non-ordinary state. It's like a debriefing session.
But Don Juan isn't just a passive listener in these debriefs. He actively stresses and highlights specific choice units from Carlos's often fragmented, confused accounts. He subtly shapes Carlos's understanding, guiding him towards a specific conceptual order that gives coherence and meaning to these otherwise chaotic phenomena.
Yeah, Castaneda himself acutely observes that Don Juan deliberately cued him through careful hints, through suggestions, subtly manipulating his perception to fit within the framework of the Yaqui Way of Knowledge.
This dynamic, it powerfully highlights the profound importance of mentorship in any field, doesn't it? Especially when you're venturing into new, complex, or maybe deeply subjective territory.
Absolutely.
Okay.
A truly effective mentor doesn't just give you answers. They help you interpret your experiences. They challenge your assumptions. They help you integrate new, often unsettling insights into a coherent, usable framework.
Like, for instance, when Carlos has that terrifying episode where he hallucinates airplanes carrying him away and he fears he's losing his soul. Don Juan becomes overly preoccupied by his condition. He takes it incredibly seriously.
And later, he teaches Carlos a specific fighting form, a precise bodily position and inner stance, to defend himself against an enemy witch, La Catalina, who apparently impersonates Don Juan to trick him and steal his energy.
And Don Juan's statement, "I am a man who knows how to become a bird," it serves to reinforce the tangible reality of these transformations within his system of understanding. It validates Carlos's experience within their shared, albeit unconventional, reality.
So for implementation in your own life, this translates into actively seeking out mentors, maybe guides, or even just trusted confidants who can help you interpret challenging experiences, help you navigate new knowledge, or simply gain perspective when your own understanding feels insufficient or your experiences feel overwhelming.
Don't be afraid to trust their perspective, especially when you're grappling with something that feels beyond your current frame of reference.
It also profoundly underscores the value of detailed self-reflection, and perhaps even just recounting your personal experiences to others. The very act of describing and articulating what you've gone through can help organize it, process it, and ultimately gain clarity from complex or confusing information.
It's like a reciprocal relationship, isn't it? Guidance from the mentor and self-discovery through reflection and articulation.
Zooming out now, the ultimate wisdom that seems to emanate from Don Juan's unique teaching style, and really from his entire life philosophy, it emphasizes this deep, profoundly personal truth about how to actually live one's life.
Yeah, he ultimately distinguishes himself from the darker path of a Diablero, or even from being just a purely aggressive warrior. He states very clearly, I am neither of them. He's chosen a different way.
This is Don Juan's evolved, deeply personal philosophy. It feels like the culmination of his own journey through these allies and enemies.
He asserts with this quiet but unwavering conviction. For me, there is only the traveling on the paths that have a heart, on any path that may have a heart. There I travel, and the only worthwhile challenge for me is to traverse its full length. And there I travel, looking, breathlessly.
That's such a powerful statement. It encapsulates his entire approach.
Yeah.
It represents this profound rejection of raw, harmful power sought just for its own sake, the kind his benefactor apparently pursued.
He views the devil's weed power as no longer needed by us, the Indians, specifically because it lacks heart. It's empty power.
He even views Carlos's inherent violent nature and his unbending immobility on his sitio traits that might seem negative as crucial characteristics that actually helped him win back his soul from La Catalina.
Which demonstrates that even seemingly negative or challenging personal traits can be recognized, harnessed, and guided towards a profoundly positive outcome if they're integrated into a path that has heart.
So for implementation, this powerful concluding philosophy, it really invites you, the listener, to critically evaluate your own life paths right now.
Are you currently pursuing something mainly out of external pressure, societal expectations, maybe even a superficial desire for power or recognition?
Or are you truly walking a path because it resonates deeply within you, because it truly has heart for you?
It's a profound call to authenticity, isn't it? To intrinsic motivation, to finding genuine meaning and purpose in the journey itself, rather than just focusing on the destination or the acquisition of external achievements.
It's about the quality of your engagement with life, the depth of your purpose, and the integrity of your choices, far more than just the quantity of your accomplishments. Hashtag, outro.
So what does all of this mean for us here and now? Don Juan's world, yeah, with its powerful allies and formidable enemies, it might seem centuries and continents removed from our daily grind.
It can feel very distant, very strange.
But the core lessons he imparts lessons about perception, about actively facing our internal struggles, about discerning which paths truly serve our deepest well-being, and about the continuous lifelong nature of growth. They feel incredibly universally relevant.
This deep dive into Carlos Castaneda's Teachings of Don Juan, it's really offered us a glimpse into a profound philosophy of living, a kind of guide to navigating the unseen paths of our own existence.
Stepping back, this material underscores a timeless truth, I think. True knowledge isn't simply about accumulating facts or information. That's just data.
No, it's about undergoing transformative experiences, interpreting them deeply, and then integrating those insights into a coherent and meaningful way of being in the world.
It's about recognizing that our greatest challenges are very often our greatest teachers, and that the discerning guidance of a knowledgeable mentor, or even just a wise friend, can be absolutely invaluable on that journey.
The journey of becoming a man of knowledge, as Don Juan describes it, is an unceasing process. It never really ends. It's presented as this lifelong battle against complacency, against stagnation, a continuous push for growth, even into old age.
So, for you, the question becomes, what enemies, maybe fear, maybe blinding clarity, maybe the temptations of power, maybe even just the weariness of old age, what enemies are you currently battling on your own path of learning, in your own pursuit of a life with heart?
And how will you choose to fight them? Not just for power or for recognition, but for a deeper, more profound seeing, for a richer way of truly engaging with your singular world.
Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.
We hope these insights help illuminate your own unseen paths of knowledge.